volgende is Michel Lindler. Michel ken ik ook al heel lang, iets minder lang dan Ingrid. Ik ken Michel met name omdat we allebei in de board zitten van de Open Preservation Foundation. Open Preservation Foundation is een membership organisatie die zich toeleidt op het toegankelijk houden van techniek en van kennis op het gebied van digitale duurzaamheid. In het dagelijks leven is Michel werkzaam als hoofd van het Digital Preservation Team bij de TIB. Dat zegt jullie niet zoveel, maar in Duitsland is het iets anders verdeeld met nationale bibliotheken dan in Nederland. TIB is de Nationale Bibliotheek op het gebied van Science and Technology. En dus zij werkt op een Digital Preservation afdeling van de Nationale Bibliotheek. Maar er zijn meer nationale bibliotheken. Ze houdt zich vooral bezig met fileformaats en de ontwikkelingen rond daarom. Daar is ze heel actief in. En ze kijkt daarbij ook in hoeverre de digitale duurzaamheidsgemeenschap zich verder kan ontwikkelen met kennis over fileformaten en risico kan verminderen. Want fileformaat, ja, dat is nog steeds essentie van een essentieel punt in digitale duurzaamheid. Naast haar rol in OPF zit Michel ook in de Rosette Digital Preservation Working Group. Dan weet je al welk systeem ze daar gebruiken bij TIB. En ze is betrokken bij veel nationale en internationale initiatieven op het gebied van digitale duurzaamheid. En daar ken ik er ook van. The floor is yours. Michel doet het in het Engels. Straks krijgen jullie weer een Nederlands, maar we wisselen dat af.
Right. Thank you. So yes, I have to apologize for not speaking Dutch, and you have to endure my German-American mixture of English. So the title of my presentation today, and thank you, Barbara, for the invitation, is 3 R's for Reuse in Digital Preservation. And when I was actually writing this title slide yesterday, I thought, 3 R's, you know, Barbara Sierman. That's 3 R's right there. So I could just leave the podium right now and be done with it. But despite the fact that I feel that she is one of the giants in digital preservation whose shoulders we stand upon, and I personally have stood upon, I feel that she wouldn't let me go with just making it as easy as that. So as I think Ingrid mentioned, she gave us one word to go by: reuse. And first of all, I felt very flattered to be invited. Then she gave me one word, and I panicked a little bit. I had a blank stare on my face for a while. And I thought, reuse? Well, what am I going to say about reuse? And then I felt really overwhelmed and thought, reuse, that's everything in digital preservation. It's the whole reason why we do this. We want to reuse information. Everything we do is about reuse. So I had to sift through all these terms that came to my head thinking about reuse. And one image that kept on coming back is this one: reuse, recycle. So it's this image that came back, and I looked at the 3 errors and the letter R, and a bunch of things starting with R popped into my head. And 3 kept on coming back, and that was research-based, reproducible, and responsible. So I decided to go with that. And what I'd like to do in the next few minutes is give you an insight of how I think these 3 terms, research-based, reproducible, and responsible, tie to digital preservation, especially in regards to reuse. And because the work we do is never done, for each of these terms, I want to also give a call to action and look at where we as a community can indeed come together and improve, because there's much work left ahead of us. So to start with the first R is for research-based. Digital preservation is cyclical by nature, right? It's something that never ends. It is about looking at digital objects today, which were created yesterday, last week, last month, last year, in order to keep them available and understandable for the future for an indefinite amount of time. But it is not just about the object where we have to look back and we have to look forward. Regarding our processes, we need to do the same thing. So the digital preservation decisions for preservation action within our own institutions of how we go about solving this issue were made in the past, but we have to re-evaluate them every day. And to check and see if they need to be adapted to actually match the requirements as we move into the future. So everything we do in digital preservation is about looking back, looking at today, but also looking at the future. And these activities require a systematic approach, and the best systematic approach that there is can be described through applied research, of course. So what can applied research look like in digital preservation practice? A very core function of digital preservation is the so-called preservation watch. That includes a few other subtasks. One means that we monitor the designated community. We monitor the people who we actually preserve this information for. And every year, maybe, we need to reevaluate what file formats do my users expect. How do they access and use the data? Using what devices, using what software, for what reason? What do they want to do with it? Do they still understand the metadata that we've provided alongside the data? At the same time, we need to monitor the technology they use, but also the technology that we have. We need to know what kind of file formats we have in our archive, and whether those technologies formats are at the risk of becoming obsolete, of being no longer usable and no longer understandable by our users because they don't have the software or the means to interpret the data. In doing that, we need to contribute to developing preservation strategies and standards. This is also something that Barbara mentioned in her introduction. We need to ask ourselves whether the standards and strategies that were developed in the past still work today. So migration and emulation, we may have chosen one. Does that still work for us? Do we need to adapt our processes? But the same question has to be asked about the larger standards that we rely upon, about certification, about OIS. Does it all still work for us? Do we need to adapt it? Can we do something to improve it? And lastly, we also need to monitor our own organization. Digital preservation is as much about looking on the inside as looking on the outside. We need to ensure that the organization actually provides the means to undergo the work that we have to do. Do we have the right amount of resources, and do we have the correct resources that we need? Do we have the right amount of people, but also do we have the right software? Right? So it's not just the designated community who needs the software licenses to render the file formats. We need that as an institution, of course, as well. And lastly, are my policies in place, and are they up to date? So in building that applied research for practice, we can thankfully rely on work already done by others or daily being done by others. Preservation Watch shows that digital preservation is a really large task, and most large institutions, so national libraries, research institutions, handle at least 100 different file formats, usually many more. And at least that's on the low end, 0.5 petabyte of data. As soon as you have digitized objects, it's much higher than that. And digital preservation teams, by comparison, range between 2 to 10 full-time equivalents, depending on whom you all count in. So that's not a lot of people to do all of this work, especially given the light of the large amount of data and the amount of different file formats that you have to take care of. So thankfully, there are community resources that we can rely on. They include research that others have already done. Some that are named here are Pronome by the National Archive, the Bit List of Endangered Species by the DPC, the Let's Solve the File Format Problem Wiki, or COPTER, which is a registry for preservation tools. So there's platforms available where we can supply our research and reuse that being done by others. And my call to action there is that we all use these resources. I know that people in my own team are hesitant sometimes to share their own research. There might be a language barrier. It might be based out of fear of writing something that might be considered wrong. It's a lot for the same reasons that people don't want to share their research data, funnily enough. So my call to action here is sharing is caring, and we can certainly all do more of that. Then there have been a number of large funded research projects dealing with digital preservation in the past, like PlanetScape, 4C has already been mentioned. But we have to ask ourselves, how successful are we at actually keeping these results alive and the thoughts process ongoing? There's no doubt in everybody's mind that the projects themselves were actually really successful, but as shown with the 4C cost model, we failed a little bit as a community in actually using the outcome of those projects. Membership organizations like the OPF actually maintain the open source tools and standards that have been a main output of these projects, but we as institutions actually need to take that knowledge, keep it alive by implementing it in our institutions. It's not enough by having a membership organization that maintains the information and the tools. We actually have to use it and put it to the test as well. So the call to action there is to learn from research outputs and help keep the results alive. The second R is for reproducible. Reproducible is a theme in itself that often comes up in research and in digital preservation, or tying it to digital preservation. It can be broken down to two different topics. One is authenticity of objects that we preserve, and the other one is that of transparency of the processes that we use to implement or to actually keep the objects alive. Both share the underlying concept of reproducibility, and authenticity and transparency need to be applied at two different levels. One is the micro level, so we need to ensure that everything that we do to a digital object needs to be reproducible. As we change it, we need to be sure to document how we changed it and to allow for the change to be rolled back in case we actually made the wrong decision in digital preservation. On a macro level, that's more on the overarching processes of the institution. So let me go a little bit into detail for that. For the micro level, digital preservation community is really, really good at actually documenting reproducibility on the level of digital objects. We write preservation plans that describe exactly what kind of tools we use, what formats we put in, what our decision is based on, what the business criteria are. We document all of that. And along the same lines, we have preservation metadata that is really good at capturing information about events, rights, agents, and environments. So the preservation metadata and the preservation plan in combination allow us, in the sense of reproducibility, to actually have a sense of who did what, when, based on which agreement, and with what outcome. And that in itself is a huge, unique selling point of digital preservation, and I think we don't really realize what a kind of unique selling point we have there. To give a parallel, imagine that Facebook had to actually tell you who used what part of your data when, based on which privacy agreement, and what did they actually do with it, and what was the outcome. And they have to supply all that information to you. So within digital preservation and cultural heritage organizations, we handle data in a very responsible and reproducible way. And I think we should use this easy-to-understand concept of reproducibility to actually better market our efforts and to let people know what it is that we do. And my call to action is that we can do that by driving our value of digital preservation by making reproducibility that we have for data objects more transparent to the world. On a macro level, we're not quite as successful, I'm afraid. So I think we have a basic shared terminology that exists, but it is often understood differently. This is actually a few years ago, I went to Mount Rushmore in the US, so the president's carved in stone. And there was this exhibit there, and it was about 3D scanning Mount Rushmore. And there was a sign that said, digitally preserving Mount Rushmore. And I said, what kind of curator would claim something like that? You can't digitally preserve a mountain. How are you going to do that? Just bogus. So yes, I think we can all agree on that there's a misalignment, maybe an understanding between the general public and us as experts of what we do. We understand what we do. Sometimes not as easy to sell, but it actually goes further than that. There's also a misunderstanding across domains. The term preservation is at times misunderstood between research data management and digital preservation domains, where bitstream preservation and logical preservation are sometimes, so one targeting file formats, the other just the bits, are used to describe the same thing without actually making a differentiation. But it can also be in place across the institutions, across different institutions. So you put 10 digital preservation experts in a room, everybody says, yes, we do preservation planning. And then when you ask them in detail, it turns out they all do something completely different. So they use the same term, but they mean something different. And the same can be even within the institution itself, so across departments. Try having a digital preservation expert and an IT expert talk about independent copies. And they can do that for 2 years, and actually, I'm talking from personal experience here, and believe that the other person knows exactly what you're talking about, and after 2 years something has been implemented, and you say, no, that's not what I meant. So we need to be very careful about defining or about definitions of what we actually mean. And my call to action there for reproducibility is to just continue our efforts to speak the same language. It's hard work, it sounds tedious at times, and you might feel like you're stupid because you sound stupid, or you're getting on someone's nerve because you keep on explaining very basic concepts, but it's actually what we need to ensure that we all follow the same goal using the same means. So the last R is for responsible. National libraries, archives, large research libraries, museums, and similar cultural heritage institutions are by definition, or even better by mandate, actually responsible for the preservation of their holdings. So we know it's our responsibility to do that. We've accepted this. Again, the responsibility can be broken down into two categories. We are responsible for what we do. So we are responsible for the objects that we care for and for the frameworks that we base our actions to these objects on. But, and this is often forgotten, we're also responsible, implicitly, for how we do it. And a very current present question is, how do we fare in the age of globalized information infrastructure and climate change and our digital preservation matters? So to start out with the what we do. Currently, digital preservation is mainly focused on technological long-term accessibility of digital objects, and until recently, sociological considerations of what we do has been largely neglected. And as a digital preservation community, that's one area where we can actually learn a lot from the research data management domain, who has been looking at ethics for a long time. So there's the information exchange between the two communities goes both ways. To illustrate what I mean by sociological considerations, a question that we should ask ourselves, or that the digital preservation domain is starting to ask itself, for example, is: do we respect the cultural framework in which digital artifacts are produced, stored, and consumed? This is something that's currently being heavily debated in, or put into place in New Zealand and Australia, where the Maori and their aboriginal cultures are being respected in asking questions of how to store data, what, in some regards, the hard drive that a treaty is stored on is treated as a cultural object in itself. So in respecting these cultures, you undergo certain ceremonies that actually pay respect to the culture whose data you save. And in a Western-based IT infrastructure world that we live in, this is something that has up to recently been completely neglected. On another level, do we exclude potential users via technological decisions or assumptions that we make? If we decide to migrate to a specific file format, and we look at different, especially if your designated community is the general public, as is the case for many national institutions, national libraries and archives, you make an implicit assumption that everybody in the general public has that software and knows how to use it when you migrate to a specific file format. So the question there is, in choosing migration targets, specific platforms, do we actually exclude specific groups, like hearing impaired people, for example? And lastly, are we open enough to foster exchange? There has been an effort to introduce a code of ethics for digital preservation, which is actually a step towards making digital preservation, or turning digital preservation into a well-defined profession. That was the word I was looking for. The Code of Ethics has been proposed by the National Library of New Zealand and NASLA, the National and State Libraries and Archives of Australasia. But similar to the foresee and cost model concepts, it's something that was proposed in 2018, but it hasn't really taken off. And I'm wondering if there's specific reasons for that, and also asking why we are so hesitant to actually talk about ethics, to talk about why we don't adapt the or further use the concept that have been proposed, but also to talk about failure. And that's just not failure on the level of concepts that don't work, but also on the failure, again, on the micro level of data that we lose. The DPC has introduced the Preservation Anonymous, I think it's called, which is like a preservation fail club. And it's really hard to admit that something has failed. I know that we all have responsibility to our funding bodies, but I think to be open and to embrace all these levels of responsibility, we also need to be open about what didn't work and not just about what worked. So the call to action there is to include sociological considerations in our processes. Lastly, we need to be responsible for how we do it. So digital preservation has a significant carbon footprint, right? I mean, factors like electricity, cooling for the data centers, hardware renewal processes, as we have to buy new hardware, renew our data centers, they're huge. They actually pose a very large environmental risk. So the question there is, how can we be more environmentally responsible in how we conduct digital preservation? For those who haven't read it yet, this one by Pendergrass, Sampson Walsh, and Alagna is an excellent read on moving towards environmentally sustainable digital preservation. It asks all these questions, and it includes includes tables of questions that you can ask within your institution in moving towards more sustainable digital preservation. Tasks to consider include, and these are partially taken from the paper, are regarding infrastructure. Do we actually use the overall storage size, or do we have a lot of empty space laying around that we maybe don't use? Can we use it more effective? Also, can we use deduplication on the storage side? Regarding processes, and I know that these are highly unpopular to ask in libraries and archives, but they have to be asked, do we really need to digitize? Right? I mean, we've embraced digital and said, yes, it's the way to go, we can share it and everybody can use it, that's true. But if we digitize something that exists in every other library anyways, and we just digitize it because we've written these mass digitization contract with Google, who's digitized all our books, and did we really need to do that? And also to reappraise. Can we deselect or remove things from our digital archive? Or is it really that when everything we've put in, we need to store for eternity? And that needs to be taken into consideration with the next step a little bit, and collaboration, deduplication within national and international preservation networks. Do we all need to store everything? I think it's something that has to be that's more easily answered on a national level. And I know the European Union is probably a touchy subject to bring up, but there are alliances there, and we can think about how to reuse information that's stored or preserved by somebody else. So the last call to action there is to move towards environmentally responsible digital preservation. So my summary is really easy. It's a to-do list of the calls for action here that you can print out, hang on your wall, and check as you go along. Thank you.